Imagine taking the Mississippi River, the Nile, and, the Rhine.
Right.
Just combine their economic output, their cultural gravity, and their absolute agricultural dominance into one incredibly massive waterway.
Which is hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is. But now, take that combined juggernaut of a river and trap it entirely within the borders of a single nation.
Yeah.
Because when you do that, you're no longer looking at a natural geographic feature, you are looking at a machine.
It fundamentally changes what a river actually is.
Yeah.
Like when a water system reaches that level of scale and that level of centralized national importance, the wild autonomous force of nature we usually associate with rivers, it just ceases to exist.
Right.
It becomes, well, an engineered infrastructure project.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you're listening right now, you are the kind of person who craves a thorough, multi-layered understanding of the world.
Absolutely.
You want the big picture and the hidden mechanics without being, buried in academic jargon.
Right, no one wants that.
Exactly. So today, we are undertaking a massive, comprehensive systems analysis of the Volga River, the longest river in Europe.
And our mission today is to essentially deconstruct this body of water.
Yes.
We are going to examine it as a vertically integrated factory, as a time capsule of human ambition, as a highly volatile economic weapon.
Which is a crazy concept.
It really is.
Yeah.
And ultimately, as a mirror reflecting the human obsession with total uncompromising control.
What's fascinating here is that to understand this river, we have to view it through multiple overlapping lenses.
Right, like physics, engineering, history, economics, and, even psychology.
Yeah, this isn't just about water flowing downhill.
Not at all. It's about how a naturally self-regulating ecosystem was systematically conquered and transformed into this top-down, vertically integrated grid.
Right.
And the central question we have to keep asking ourselves throughout this deep dive is, at what exact point does a river stop being a river and simply become a machine?
To answer that, I think we have to start with the physical canvas. Like, we need to understand the actual geography before we can understand the engineering that kind of, broke it.
Definitely. And the scale of the Volga is just staggering.
Yeah.
It's essential to visualize just how much of the continent it dominates.
Pitch the scale to me.
So it runs for 3,530 kilometers.
Wow.
Yeah, that is roughly 2,200 miles of continuous waterway.
That's massive.
And the drainage basin, which is, the area of land where all the rain and snow melt eventually funnels into the river.
Right.
That covers 1.35 million square kilometers.
Jeez.
Yeah. It begins up in the Valdai Hills in the northwest of Russia, which is this area characterized by gentle, rolling elevations and dense forests.
Okay.
And it just winds its way slowly and massively all the way down to the Caspian Sea.
And right there, the Caspian Sea, that is where the geography throws a massive curveball.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the critical defining scientific feature of this entire system is that the Volga operates within an endorheic basin.
Yes. And that term is the absolute key to the entire ecological reality of the river.
Let's define that for everyone.
Sure. So an endorheic basin is a closed drainage basin that retains water and allows no outflow to other external bodies of water, like oceans or world-spanning seas.
Right. Because most of the great rivers you think of, like the Amazon, the Mississippi, the Nile,
they eventually meet the global ocean.
Right. The water joins the massive circulating currents of the planet.
Exactly. But the Volga does not. It empties into the Caspian Sea, which is geographically landlocked.
Right.
Water enters this sea from the river, but it never flows out. It only escapes through evaporation into the atmosphere.
So I picture it like an enormous geographic cul-de-sac.
That's a great way to put it.
Or, even a giant bathtub with the drain permanently plugged.
Yes.
Like if you're pouring water in, but the only way water leaves is by turning into steam, everything else you poured in with that water just stays in the tub.
That is the exact physical mechanism at play here.
Yeah.
Because it's a closed system, whatever happens upstream in the Volga Basin is just permanently trapped.
Wow.
Yeah. Like if agricultural runoff introduces massive amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus, or if industrial plants dump chemical waste,
Which they do.
which they heavily do, there is no infinite ocean current to eventually wash it away or dilute it on a global scale.
It's just stuck.
The toxins, the salts, the heavy metals, they simply accumulate. The consequences of human activity are entirely localized and amplified.
So every mistake made along those 3,530 kilometers eventually pools right there in the Caspian Sea.
Exactly. And the sheer volume of human activity on this river is staggering.
Well, yeah, the modern Volga isn't really a continuous flow of water anymore, is it?
No, not at all.
It has been physically chopped up into something called the Volga-Kama Cascade.
Yeah, this is the definitive engineering feat that turned the river into a machine.
Explain that to me. Like, what was it before the cascade?
Well, the Volga was historically a low-gradient river.
Yeah.
It didn't rush violently down steep mountain gorges, right?
Yeah, okay.
It flowed slowly, meandering across these wide plains, carrying a really high load of sediment.
Gotcha.
But engineers looked at that slow, continuous flow and decided to completely segment it. They built a staggering chain of massive artificial reservoirs and hydroelectric dams.
They effectively turned a gentle slope into a harsh, controlled staircase.
That's exactly what they did.
Think of a natural river, like a healthy, organic circulatory system in the human body.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right, like the heart beats, the blood flows naturally, adapting to the terrain, expanding and contracting based on what the environment naturally provides.
Right.
But what human engineering did to the Volga is akin to cutting out that natural heart and replacing it with a series of mechanical pacemakers and rigid synthetic tubes.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to conceptualize it.
It absolutely keeps the economic body alive. It moves the fluids exactly where they need to go,
Yeah.
but it operates on a rigid, predetermined schedule.
Exactly. It completely eradicates the naturally chaotic rhythm.
So what happens to the ecology when you eradicate that rhythm?
Well, the physics of that mechanical pacemaking completely upends the ecology. A natural river is fundamentally a self-regulating system that relies on cyclical extremes.
Extremes like floods.
Yes. Historically, the Volga's health depended on massive spring floods. When the harsh Russian winters ended, millions of tons of snowmelt would surge into the river,
Right.
and the water would violently overtop the banks, spreading out for miles across the surrounding floodplains.
And that's actually a good thing for the land, right?
It's vital. When that water eventually receded, it left behind incredibly rich, fertile sediment. It was this autonomous natural fertilization cycle.
Wow.
It recharged the groundwater, fed the wetlands, and just flushed out stagnant debris.
But when you install mechanical pacemakers, when you build a huge concrete wall across the river, you have to stabilize the flow,
Right, you trap the floodwaters in a reservoir to generate electricity evenly throughout the year.
which means you eliminate the flood.
You completely flatten the pulse of the river. And the biological cost of flattening that pulse is devastating.
Especially for certain species, right?
Oh, absolutely. Particularly for species that evolved over millions of years to exploit those massive floods.
Mhm.
The most famous example is the sturgeon, the ancient fish that produces beluga caviar.
Sturgeon are basically living dinosaurs.
They really are. They're these massive bottom-feeding fish that can live for over a century.
That's wild. 100 years old.
Yeah, and their biological imperative,
Yeah.
their reproductive cycle, requires them to migrate massive distances.
Okay.
They live most of their adult lives in the Caspian Sea, but they evolved to swim hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers up a continuous fast-flowing river to spawn in the gravel beds upstream.
But now there's a staircase of concrete dams in the way.
Exactly. When you engineer that staircase, you physically sever those migration routes. You place an impenetrable wall between the fish and their spawning grounds.
You fragment a continuous habitat into a series of, well, disconnected, stagnant lakes.
That's exactly it. And it's not just the fish.
Right. There's a huge impact at the end of the river, too.
Yes, down at the very end of the river where it fans out into the Caspian Sea, you have the Volga Delta. Millions of migratory birds rely on those wetlands.
And those wetlands only exist because of the dynamic fluctuation of water.
Precisely. They need the wet and dry cycles to sustain the specific types of reeds, insects, and fish that the birds feed on.
Okay.
But when the dam operators upstream stabilize the water flow to ensure, say, a cargo ship can pass smoothly in October,
Right.
or to keep the hydroelectric turbines spinning at maximum capacity in January, they starve the delta of its natural variability.
So the wetlands dry up.
The wetlands dry up, the reeds die off, and the biodiversity just plummets.
It really shows how we prioritize predictable mechanical outputs over natural resilience.
Oh, 100%.
Like, we demand cheap electricity when we flip a switch. We demand massive cargo ships can move grain and oil year-round. And we demand that our riverfront real estate never gets flooded.
All right, we love the predictability.
We love the predictability the machine provides, but we rarely look at the sheer scale of biological destruction required to maintain it.
Well, and it's important to note that this level of absolute mechanical control didn't just happen overnight.
No, of course not.
It is the result of shifting human priorities spanning millennia. To really grasp how we got to this rusted, failing machine, We have to look at the river through the lens of time.
Okay, let's do that. Because every generation that inherits this geography fundamentally redefines its purpose.
Exactly.
Let's rewind the clock to establish our baseline. If we go back roughly 10,000 years, right to the start of the Holocene epoch,
Okay, setting the scene.
the last ice age is retreating. Massive continent-spanning glaciers are melting, and that meltwater is violently carving out the Eurasian landscape. What does the Volga look like then?
The physical reality of the Volga Basin at this time is one of immense wild volatility.
Yeah.
The river channels are significantly wider, they flow much faster, and they are constantly shifting their course across the plains. In systems theory, this is described as a high-entropy baseline.
Let's clearly define what entropy means in the context of a river ecosystem, because I think that's a crucial concept for everyone to understand.
Definitely. Think of entropy as a measure of disorder, or how energy is dispersed within a system.
Okay.
A low-entropy system is highly organized and concentrated, like a straight paved canal.
Very predictable.
Right. But a high-entropy system is wild, scattered, and complex. A high-entropy river dissipates its energy by meandering, overflowing its banks, creating oxbow lakes, and just constantly moving earth around.
So it's completely unoptimized from an engineering standpoint.
Totally unoptimized.
Yeah.
But because it is so dynamic and complex, it is incredibly resilient to shocks. It supports megafauna, vast forests, and early hunter-gatherers.
It's just raw, unmanaged nature.
Exactly.
But as human civilization develops into the ancient and medieval periods, the role of the river undergoes its first major transition.
Yes, it evolves from a wild habitat into an economic network.
This is the era of the great trade routes, right?
Exactly. The Volga becomes the primary artery linking northern Europe, specifically Scandinavia and the Vikings, with the rich Islamic world and Central Asia to the south.
That's a massive span.
It is.
Yeah.
And you have powerful, complex civilizations like the Khazar Khaganate and the Volga Bulgars establishing themselves along the banks just to control and tax this trade.
But the crucial distinction here is how they extracted value from the river.
Right.
Because in the medieval era, the value of the river comes entirely from connection, not from control.
Yes, that's exactly it. They are building wooden ships to navigate the currents, but they aren't trying to change the currents themselves.
Right.
They're adapting their civilization to the natural rhythm of the water.
But that adaptability vanishes during the era of Imperial Russia, spanning roughly the 1500s through the 1800s.
Completely vanishes. The Russian state begins a massive centuries-long campaign of expansion and consolidation.
They conquer the independent khanates along the river like Kazan and Astrakhan.
Right, and they lock down the entire basin.
Yeah.
The Volga transitions from a multi-ethnic shared trade corridor into the unquestioned economic and cultural backbone of the Russian Empire.
This is exactly when the cultural identity of Mother Volga is fully cemented into the national consciousness.
Yes. The state claims ownership of the river. And while they still aren't building concrete dams yet, they are beginning to force the river to bend to human will through sheer, agonizing physical labor.
You're talking about the burlaki.
Yes, the famous barge haulers.
Explain what they did, because it's pretty brutal.
It is. Before steam engines, moving massive amounts of grain or salt upstream against the current required brute force.
Right.
Teams of destitute men would harness themselves to thick ropes and literally drag massive cargo ships up the riverbank, step by agonizing step, for hundreds of miles. It was brutal, back-breaking labor that perfectly symbolized this shifting relationship. Human beings throwing their physical bodies against the raw power of the river to force an economic outcome.
So they claimed it, they forced labor upon it, but they didn't fundamentally alter its physics yet.
Not yet.
That threshold is crossed violently during the Soviet era, starting in the 1920s. This is the period of total engineering.
Total engineering is the perfect name for it. The Soviet ideological vision was inextricably linked to rapid, uncompromising industrialization. Right. They viewed an untamed, high-entropy river not as a beautiful natural system, but as a failure of engineering. A free-flowing river was, in their eyes, just wasted energy.
So they decided to fix it.
Oh, they fixed it. Under leaders like Stalin, they initiated some of the most aggressive hydrological re-engineering projects in the history of human civilization.
This is when that Volga-Kama cascade we talked about is actually constructed.
Yes.
And the sheer logistics of this are terrifying. They poured millions of tons of concrete to build dams the size of small mountains across the riverbed.
But when you build a dam that large, the water has nowhere to go but up and out.
Right. So what happened to the landscape?
The geographic alteration was apocalyptic for the local environment. To create the artificial reservoirs necessary to power the hydroelectric turbines, they intentionally flooded thousands of square miles of land.
Thousands of square miles.
Yes, entire historic towns, ancient monasteries, centuries-old forests, and countless villages were permanently submerged.
That's haunting.
It really is. The people were relocated, and their history was drowned to create a flat, predictable surface for cargo ships.
They didn't just flood the land, they physically tore open the earth to connect basins that nature had deliberately kept separate,
Yes, they built the Volga Canal.
using massive amounts of forced labor.
Yes, gulag labor. They dug a trench deep enough and wide enough to link the closed system of the Volga and the Caspian Sea to the Don River.
Which flows into the Black Sea and ultimately the global ocean.
Exactly. They systematically dismantled the natural geography of the continent. They decided that the water would no longer flow where gravity and time dictated.
Right, it would flow where the 5-year plan required it to flow.
That's right. And the trade-off was incredibly stark. On paper, they achieved their exact goals. They generated massive, reliable energy for their factories.
And deep water shipping lanes for bulk transport.
Yes, they skyrocketed national economic output. But the cost was the total biological collapse of the natural ecosystem.
Which brings us to the physical reality of the present day. The machine they built in the mid-20th century is getting old.
Very old.
We are currently operating in a deeply strained maintenance phase.
Right.
The concrete in those massive dams is aging. The chemical pollution from decades of heavy industry and intensified agriculture is compounding in that closed endorheic basin.
Because it has nowhere else to go.
Exactly. The biodiversity isn't just degraded, it's on life support. The machine is still functioning, but you can hear the gears grinding.
Oh, absolutely. And if we look at the trajectory of this decay and project outward to the years 2050 or 2100, we are approaching a critical fork in the road.
Okay, let's look at the future scenarios.
There are 3 primary speculative scenarios for the future of this engineered basin. Scenario A is the degradation path.
Which sounds bad.
It is. This is the default if we simply let the current strain run its course.
Yeah.
Climate change drives more severe, prolonged droughts in the region. The water volume drops precipitously.
And the Caspian Sea.
The Caspian Sea begins to shrink rapidly and becomes highly saline and toxic. The aging dams start to crack, the shipping lanes become too shallow for cargo, and the entire macroeconomic transport system slowly collapses under the physical lack of water.
So scenario A is just the slow, agonizing death of the machine.
Pretty much.
What happens in scenario B?
Scenario B envisions managed recovery. This requires a profound paradigm shift in how the state views the river. It involves implementing smarter, highly efficient water management techniques, mandating strict reductions in industrial pollution, and actually attempting partial ecological restoration.
Like what? Tearing down dams.
Well, perhaps dismantling a few smaller dams to allow seasonal flooding in critical areas. It's an attempt to negotiate a truce between the demands of the energy grid and the survival of the ecosystem.
Right. And then there is scenario C, hypercontrol.
Scenario C is doubling down. Instead of retreating or trying to restore nature, we lean entirely into the engineering.
How so?
We deploy next-generation technology. We implement vast, AI-managed water systems that utilize millions of sensors to calculate flow rates, evaporation loss, and industrial demand down to the microliter.
Wow.
We engineer new synthetic habitats. The river completely ceases to be a biological entity and becomes a fully artificialized, mathematically perfect conduit for resource delivery.
Okay, I have to push back hard here.
On which part?
On the optimism of scenario B, if we are being brutally honest about human nature, and specifically about the inertia of large-scale infrastructure, I don't think managed recovery is actually possible.
Why do you view it as impossible?
Because you cannot undam a civilization. Think about the sheer weight of dependency.
Right.
You have massive, sprawling cities of over 1 million people, like Samara and Kazan, that rely on the electricity generated by those specific dams. You have a global grain market that relies on those deep water shipping lanes to export wheat out of the Russian interior.
Yeah, the economic ties are deep.
Exactly. So if you tell a society, hey, We need to let the wetlands recover and restore the sturgeon, so your power bill is going to triple and half your shipping fleet is grounded. Society will reject it.
That's a fair point.
Once you have built a machine on this scale, and once the economy has molded itself to fit the shape of that machine, removing it is political and economic suicide. It feels like we are completely locked into scenario C.
And that is the ultimate inescapable trap of infrastructure, isn't it?
Yeah.
You engineer a massive, permanent solution to solve a temporary problem of efficiency. But over a few generations, your entire society re-architects itself around the existence of that infrastructure.
The whole system shapes itself around the concrete.
Exactly. The original problem is forgotten, and the maintenance of the machine becomes an absolute existential requirement, regardless of how devastating the ecological cost becomes.
And that relentless pursuit of control didn't just pour concrete, it rewired the fundamental concept of value.
It really did.
By treating the river as a machine, they created a radically new kind of economy. The infrastructure turned the water itself into an economic weapon and a tool for centralized, top-down governance.
To understand this, we have to look at the river through the lens of power and conflict. A brilliant synthesis here is to view the modern Volga exactly as you would view a vertically integrated factory.
Okay, pitch this factory to me.
Well, in a standard business model, you have inputs, processors, outputs, and waste, right?
Right.
The Volga operates on the exact same logic.
Let's break down that factory floor. The raw input is the water flowing out of the Valdai Hills.
Exactly. The water is the raw material. The processors are the infrastructure, the dams, the locks, the canals, the pumping stations.
Okay.
These processors take the raw material and convert it into profitable output. The output is the heavy industrial manufacturing, the massive hydroelectric energy, and the large-scale irrigated agriculture.
And the natural environment, where does that fit in?
The natural environment is relegated to being the cost sink. It is the designated dumping ground.
Ouch.
It absorbs the toxic waste, the agricultural runoff, and the biological degradation so that the factory can continue to operate profitably.
The brutal efficiency of that model is terrifying.
It is.
Let's look closer at the specific sectors of this factory, starting with agriculture. We talked earlier about how the farms historically relied on the natural spring floods for fertilization.
Right.
By stopping the floods, they traded a free natural cycle for an expensive mechanical one.
Yes, they shifted entirely to irrigation dependency. They built massive networks of pipes and canals to pump water directly from the artificial reservoirs onto the fields.
Okay.
While this allows them to water crops exactly when they want to, it introduces a severe mechanical flaw: soil salinization.
How does that happen?
When you constantly pump river water onto fields in a dry climate, the water evaporates quickly, leaving behind trace amounts of dissolved salts and minerals.
Ah.
Over decades, this salt builds up until the soil becomes toxic and barren. You are slowly poisoning the very land you were trying to cultivate.
Then you have the industry and transport sector of the factory.
Right.
The Volga is the main internal shipping artery for the entire nation. It moves staggering volumes of bulk materials, oil from the south, timber from the north, grain from the central steppes.
It physically connects major industrial hubs.
And the hydropower dams act as the battery pack for this entire heavy manufacturing corridor.
Exactly. And finally, you have the extraction sector, which we touched on with the fisheries.
What's sturgeon?
Yes. In a natural system, extraction is based on renewable yield. You take only what the ecosystem can replenish.
Right.
In the factory model, extraction becomes a depletion cycle. The resource is strip-mined until it collapses entirely, which is precisely what happened to the commercial sturgeon fishery.
What really stands out when you look at this factory model is the physical geography of power.
Yes.
It creates an incredibly stark dynamic between upstream and downstream. If you live upstream and your regional government controls the hydroelectric dam, you hold the physical lever that determines the fate of everyone below you.
It is the purest, most undeniable physical manifestation of hierarchical power. Upstream operators possess absolute control over the flow of reality. They decide exactly how much water moves and exactly when it moves.
I picture it like a massive 50-story apartment building,
So,
but this building is run by a landlord who lives alone in the penthouse. And that penthouse landlord controls a single thermostat and a single water valve for the entire building.
that's a great analogy.
Right. He only adjusts those dials based on what makes the penthouse comfortable. If he wants a hot shower, he cranks the pressure, even if it bursts the pipes on the bottom floor.
Exactly.
If the basement apartments are freezing in the winter or the middle floors have no water pressure to drink, it doesn't matter. The control is utterly centralized at the top.
And the benefits reflect that.
Right. The benefits of the system flow exclusively up the hierarchy to the state, to the massive urban centers, to the heavy industries. And the costs, the pollution, the dry riverbeds, the dying fish, they flow down.
both physically and socially.
Yeah, they flow down physically to the end of the river and socially to the rural, less politically connected communities that rely on the local ecology.
That centralization of state control is paramount here. The Volga is not managed as a shared democratic resource where local communities have a say in the water levels.
No.
It is managed as a vital strategic national asset. The federal government prioritizes total national economic output over any regional or local well-being.
Which makes sense from a macro perspective.
It does. And because of this immense centralized strategic value, the river has historically transcended simple economics. It becomes a primary target in geopolitical warfare.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to understand how a river can be a weapon, you just have to look at the Battle of Stalingrad during World War II.
Yes.
The city is now called Volgograd, and it sits right on the banks of the lower Volga.
The Battle of Stalingrad was arguably the single bloodiest and most decisive turning point in human history.
Yeah.
The German army lost roughly 800,000 casualties trying to take it. And they didn't march there just because they wanted a city with Stalin's name on it. The location was a geographic imperative.
Why did the geography matter so much to the military strategy? Like, what was the actual play there?
Because of logistics.
Hmm.
The Soviet war machine, the tanks, the planes, the trucks ran on oil.
Naturally.
And the vast majority of that oil came from the oil fields in the Caucasus, near Baku, way down south. That oil was loaded onto massive barges on the Caspian Sea, shipped to the mouth of the Volga, and then transported up the river to the factories and the front lines in the north. The Volga was the absolute lifeline of the Soviet military.
And Volgograd is essentially the pinch point. It's where the river bends closest to the Western Front.
Exactly. If the German forces could capture that city, they could physically cut the river. They wouldn't even need to cross it.
Just block it.
Right. They just needed to place their artillery on the high banks and sink any barge trying to move upstream. By severing the Volga, they would choke off the entire Soviet oil supply line.
Wow.
The tanks would run dry, the factories would stop, and the Soviet Union would collapse. Control of the water meant control of the continent. The river wasn't just a border, it was the ultimate supply chain target.
Okay, so we have this massive centralized machine. It creates immense economic output. It functions as a critical military supply chain, and it physically reshapes the continent.
Yeah.
But here is the terrifying paradox of the entire endeavor. By trying to eliminate the natural, predictable risks of living near a river, by building dams to stop floods and locks, to guarantee deep water, humans have inadvertently engineered entirely new, infinitely more catastrophic risks.
This is where we have to look through the risk and disaster lens. It is arguably the most sobering aspect of the entire analysis.
I agree.
When you engineer a system this complex, you fundamentally alter the nature of danger. Let's break down the new risk profiles they created. First, consider flooding.
Wait, I thought the whole point of the dams was to stop the flooding.
They do stop the routine flooding.
Yeah.
But in doing so, they create a lethal psychological effect. Extreme complacency. Because the river hasn't naturally flooded in decades, urban planners, industries, and residents build permanent, expensive infrastructure directly on the historic floodplains.
Right, they feel perfectly safe.
They feel completely safe behind the concrete. But if a truly unprecedented weather event occurs, say a massive rapid snowmelt that exceeds the dam's storage capacity.
Or if the aging infrastructure simply fails.
Exactly. The operators are then forced to open the spillways all at once. The resulting flood isn't just a seasonal inconvenience of muddy water in a field. It is a sudden, catastrophic disaster that destroys entire cities.
Because all the natural buffering zones, the wetlands and empty floodplains have been paved over.
Exactly. You trade a guaranteed small risk for a hidden, apocalyptic risk.
That's terrifying. Then you have the threat of drought, which exposes the utter fragility of this engineered dependency.
Yes. A natural river can survive a drought. It just shrinks. The animals adapt. But an engineered river stalls completely.
Because the machine needs a certain baseline to run.
Right. If the water levels drop too low in the reservoirs, the physics of the machine fail. The water pressure isn't high enough to spin the massive hydroelectric turbines, so the power grid goes down.
Oh, man.
The artificial shipping lanes become too shallow, so the massive cargo ships run aground, paralyzing the supply chain. The irrigation pumps suck mud instead of water, leading to massive crop failures.
The entire vertically integrated factory just grinds to a halt.
It does. And you have to add the chronic threat of pollution to that mix. A slow, accumulating soup of industrial toxins, agricultural fertilizers, and untreated wastewater traveling downstream into that closed endorheic basin.
And hovering over all of this is the looming specter of infrastructure failure. These dams were built in the 1950s and 60s. Concrete degrades. Rebar rusts.
And this brings us to the most critical concept in modern risk analysis: nonlinear stacking, or compound risk.
Okay, unpack that.
The true danger to the Volga isn't any single one of these threats happening in isolation. We can manage a drought. We can manage a localized pollution spill.
Right.
The catastrophic danger lies in these events happening simultaneously and amplifying each other in unpredictable ways.
Give me a physical example of how nonlinear stacking actually operates.
Let's combine drought and pollution. Imagine a severe, multi-year regional drought. The actual volume of water flowing through the river drops by, say, 30%. However, the factories and the heavy agriculture along the banks don't stop working. They are still discharging their usual, massive, daily volume of chemical runoff and wastewater into the river.
Right, because the factory quotas don't change just because it didn't rain.
Exactly. But now, there's 30% less clean water to dilute those chemicals. Because the dilution factor drops, the actual concentration of toxins in the water doesn't just increase linearly, it skyrockets.
That's horrible.
The water crosses the toxic threshold, leading to massive sudden die-offs of fish and the poisoning of municipal water supplies downstream. So drought plus pollution doesn't equal a bad summer. It equals a lethal toxic shock to the entire remaining ecosystem.
Wow. Or think about the mechanical cascade of infrastructure failure. Let's use an analogy.
Sure.
Think of the engineered Volga like a high-performance race car engine. For decades, the engineers have been running this engine at 9,000 RPMs, right at the red line, trying to extract maximum horsepower and economic output.
Sure.
You can do that for a while if you maintain it perfectly. But the parts are wearing down. The heat is building up. You hit one small bump, say a sudden, unseasonal freeze that stresses the concrete of a single dam, and the engine block cracks.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right, because if one major dam in the Volga-Kama Cascade fails, it releases a wall of water into the reservoir immediately below it.
Which then overwhelms that dam.
Exactly. That sudden surge of pressure overwhelms the next dam, causing it to fail, which releases an even larger wall of water. It's a domino effect.
It is the ultimate paradox of hyper-engineering. The exact same highly integrated system that provides life, stability, and immense national wealth can simultaneously destroy it all if that engineered stability falters even a fraction of a percent.
It makes you step back and seriously question the entire philosophy of control.
It really does.
Like, are we actually reducing risk by building these massive concrete systems, or are we just hoarding it? It feels like we've simply taken the low-level, everyday friction of living with nature and concentrated all of it into a massive, invisible pressure cooker hidden behind a concrete wall.
Yeah.
We're just kicking the can down the road until we hit a breaking point where the interdependent systems all fail at the exact same time.
Most systems analysts would argue that we are absolutely hoarding risk. We have traded high-frequency, low-consequence events, like a seasonal muddy flood that fertilizes a field, for low-frequency, high-consequence events, like the total collapse of a regional power grid or a cascading dam failure.
Up until now, we've been looking at the Volga from 30,000 feet. We've talked about endorheic basins, macroeconomic inputs, World War II logistics, and compound risk.
The big picture stuff.
Exactly. But abstraction only gets you so far. What does this absolute control actually feel like? If you wake up tomorrow morning and walk down to the banks of the river, how do you physically experience this machine?
To understand that, we have to look through the human and the spiritual lenses.
Right.
The lived experience of the river varies wildly depending on your exact physical and economic relationship to the water. We can contrast three distinct perspectives to understand this gradient of awareness. First, consider the fisherman.
This is someone living down in the delta, relying directly on the biology of the river for their livelihood.
Yes. The fisherman has an intensely high, direct awareness of the system. Their daily survival is dictated by the subtle nuances of the river, the shift in the light, the exact season, the minor fluctuations in water
I
temperature.
know it intimately.
They understand the sensory profile implicitly. They know the smell of the organic mud, the scent of the algae blooms, the tension in the wet nets. But because they're intimately connected to the biology, they are the ones absorbing the most acute, devastating impact of the engineering.
Right.
They are watching their daily catch plummet. They are watching the sturgeon disappear. They feel the degradation of the ecosystem in their hands and in their wallets.
They are basically the early warning system.
Exactly.
Then one step removed from that, you have the farmer.
The farmer has a medium awareness of the river. Their dependency is semi-direct. They care deeply about the water because without it, their crops die.
Sure.
But their interaction is mediated. They aren't out on a boat smelling the algae. They are standing in a dry field looking at a steel irrigation pipe.
It's mechanical to them.
Very. They're looking at state-mandated water allowance schedules and automated pumping reports. They view the river purely as a crucial resource input, a utility that must be delivered on time.
And finally, you have the urban resident. Someone living in a massive modern metropolis like Kazan or Samara, completely surrounded by concrete.
Yes, the urban resident has a very low awareness and an entirely indirect dependency. To them, the river is primarily an aesthetic feature.
It looks nice from the apartment.
Right, it's a beautiful, wide expanse of blue water to look at from a high-rise, or a pleasant paved promenade to walk along on a Sunday afternoon.
But they don't think about what makes it work.
Not at all. When they flip a light switch in their kitchen, they do not visualize the massive hydropower dam hundreds of miles upstream holding back millions of tons of water to generate that electricity.
Yeah.
When they turn on the tap, they don't think about the chemical filtration required to make the water safe. Their entire physical experience of the river is mediated, filtered, and abstracted by layers of infrastructure.
That generational shift toward total abstraction is profound. It ties deeply into the spiritual and cultural layer of the river. We mentioned the phrase Mother Volga earlier.
We did.
It's important to clarify the nature of that reverence. The Volga isn't literally deified, right? It's not worshipped as a conscious god that demands sacrifice.
Right. It is culturally maternal rather than strictly divine. It represents a shared national struggle, a profound, enduring patience, and the relentless passage of life.
Interesting.
If you listen to the traditional folk music, like the famous song of the Burlaki barge haulers, the river isn't portrayed as a benevolent, easy provider.
How is it portrayed?
It is a harsh, demanding force that bears witness to the suffering and the incredible endurance of the people working on it.
But if we abstract our relationship to the river behind concrete and steel pipes, do we lose that cultural understanding?
That's the question.
If we no longer have to struggle against the current, do we truly understand the system that keeps us alive?
That is the core danger of extreme engineering. We have engineered away the direct physical struggle, but in doing so, we have severed our sensory connection to reality.
I think the sensory experience is the most telling diagnostic tool we have. Forget the economic spreadsheets for a second. Think about the profound, deafening silence when those vast stretches of the river freeze solid in the dead of winter.
It's incredibly powerful.
The absolute stillness. Contrast that natural sensory experience with the present day, standing near the industrial zones of Volgograd. You breathe in and you smell the harsh, acrid chemical odors of petrochemical processing mixing with the stagnant water. You don't need a PhD in ecology or a sensor network to tell you the health of the river.
You really don't.
You just need to stand on the bank and breathe. Your human senses evolved to detect poison. If the river smells like industrial decay and chemical runoff, the biological system is sick, completely regardless of what the factory output reports claim.
Exactly. But because the vast majority of the population, the urban residents, only experience the river as a clean glass of municipal tap water or a scenic backdrop for a photograph, that primal sensory alarm bell is completely disconnected.
Right.
The system is dying, but the people depending on it can't smell the rot.
To truly grasp just how uniquely extreme the situation on the Volga is, we have to pull back and do a global comparative analysis.
Okay, let's zoom out.
We need to use other major world rivers as a kind of geopolitical Rorschach test. When you contrast the Volga against other famous waterways, its sheer level of artificiality becomes staggering.
The contrasts reveal exactly what human societies prioritize. Let's start by comparing it to the Nile.
Okay, the Nile.
Historically, the entire Egyptian civilization was defined by the predictable, natural, seasonal flooding of the Nile. The river dictated the calendar. Right. The Nile forced human beings to adapt their agriculture and their cities to its natural rhythm. The modern Volga represents the exact inversion of that relationship. Instead of humans adapting to the river's schedule, humans have forcefully replaced the natural rhythm with a rigid, mechanically dictated schedule of power generation.
What about the Amazon?
The Amazon River is the ultimate expression of wild, high-entropy geography. It is fiercely independent, massively complex, and acts as a global ecological lung.
You can't really tame the Amazon.
Right, it physically resists large-scale human control through its sheer density and volatility. The Volga is the antithesis of the Amazon. It is a fully managed, low-entropy, highly structured national machine.
The comparison to the Mississippi River is where the nuances really come out, I think, because at first glance, they look very similar.
They do.
They are both massive, heavily engineered economic arteries carrying grain and oil through the heartland of a superpower.
They share a lot of DNA in terms of economic purpose. Both rely on complex systems of levees and locks. However, the Mississippi still retains some critical, partial natural functions.
Also,
In its lower stretches, it still routinely floods, and engineering efforts have sometimes incorporated controlled flooding into the floodways to mimic natural processes. It is a hybrid system part machine, part wild river.
okay, that makes sense.
But the Volga, characterized by its continuous unbroken chain of massive reservoirs, leans much, much further toward total, absolute control. There is almost no wildness left in the main channel.
We mentioned the cultural reverence of Mother Volga a little bit ago. How does that compare to a river like the Ganges in India?
Oh, it's very different. The Ganges is fundamentally religiously sacred. It is viewed by hundreds of millions of people as a literal divine entity, a goddess capable of providing spiritual purification and washing away sin.
The water itself is holy.
Exactly. The Volga is culturally sacred, but secularly utilized. It provides a profound sense of shared history and national identity, but the water itself isn't holy. No one is seeking spiritual absolution by bathing in the reservoir behind a Soviet hydroelectric dam.
Fair point. And finally, geopolitically, we have to compare it to the Danube in Europe.
The Danube is the classic international connector. It flows through or borders 10 different European countries.
Wow.
Managing a river like that requires constant, exhausting international negotiation. You need complex treaties dictating water quality, shipping rights, and dam construction. Every action requires compromise.
But the Volga?
The Volga exists entirely, 100% within the sovereign borders of Russia. There are no international treaties restricting how many dams they can build or how much water they can divert. It is an internal powerhouse governed by a single state holding absolute authority.
Synthesizing all of those comparisons, you realize that the Volga is the ultimate global outlier. It is a massive, closed-loop, single-state mega machine. There is arguably nothing else on the planet quite like it in terms of sheer, unchallenged, unilateral human command over a water system of this magnitude.
And that profound, unwavering desire for command brings us to the final and perhaps most revealing lens of our analysis, the philosophical mirror.
Okay, let's get into the philosophy of it.
When we look at the extreme lengths humans have gone to conquer the Volga, we aren't just looking at hydrology or economics. We're looking at a physical manifestation of human psychology.
Interesting.
The way we treat the river is a perfect metaphor for how we manage the human condition itself.
This is where our systems analysis gets deeply psychological. It forces us to confront these massive, irreconcilable philosophical tensions. The desire for control versus the necessity of surrender. The illusion of stability versus the reality of chaos. The drive for absolute efficiency versus the search for deeper meaning.
To map these tensions, we can utilize a framework of distinct subpersonalities, viewing different psychological traits as if they were people interacting with the river environment. Let's start with the subpersonality representing structure and control. Let's call him Kenny.
What does Kenny see when he looks at the river?
Kenny thrives on engineering. He loves the dams, the locks, the optimized logistics, the spreadsheets predicting kilowatt hours. Kenny desires a world that is perfectly predictable and totally safe from the chaos of natural flooding.
But what's his flaw?
Kenny's tragic flaw is his rigidity. He has a fundamental inability to accept uncertainty. The lesson the Volga teaches Kenny is that over-control is an illusion that merely creates deeper fragility.
Right.
By trying to engineer away every minor risk, Kenny has built a machine that is prone to catastrophic system-wide failure. He must learn that true survival requires designing for resilience and adaptability, not just perfect, rigid order.
Okay, opposite of Kenny, you have the subpersonality representing freedom and spontaneity. Let's call her Addie.
Addie suffocates under predictable, highly controlled environments. She looks at the concrete staircase of the Volga Kama Cascade and feels trapped.
Naturally.
She actively seeks out the few remaining wild, unregulated stretches of the river, the hidden creeks, the unmanaged delta where nature still operates on its own chaotic terms.
What's her lesson?
The philosophical lesson for Addie is far more difficult.
Mm.
The wildness is almost entirely gone, and it isn't coming back. Addie has to figure out the complex psychological task of finding a sense of internal freedom and spontaneity within a reality of unavoidable, heavy constraints.
You also have Val, representing relentless ambition and output. Val measures the absolute success of the river strictly by the grain yields, the tonnage of cargo shipped, and the megawatt hours generated.
Very numbers-driven.
Very. Val refuses to acknowledge the biological cost or the toxic accumulation in the Endorheic Basin until the entire fishery collapses. And balancing Val, you have Devon, representing endurance and stoicism.
Devon.
Devon is the spirit of the Burlaki barge haulers. Devon thrives in the harsh winter freezes and the grueling physical labor required to keep the machine running. But in doing so, Devon risks becoming emotionally isolated and numb to the beauty of the system.
By viewing the physical river through these psychological subpersonalities, we arrive at a profound realization. Stability is not a natural state of being.
It's an invention.
It is. The stability we witness on the modern Volga is entirely artificially constructed, and maintaining that illusion of stability requires an exhausting, continuous, almost desperate expenditure of energy, concrete, and resources.
When I look at those psychological profiles, I immediately picture the engineered Volga River as a person.
How so?
Think of a highly disciplined, intensely burdened, ultimate type A individual.
Oh, I see where you're going.
This person is holding everything together for everyone else. They are providing the sole income for their family, they are running the massive company, they're putting out fires, and they never, ever miss a deadline.
Always on.
Always on. On the outside, if you just look at their output, they appear perfectly stable, incredibly successful, and brutally efficient. But beneath the surface, inside their own mind, they are operating under immense, unsustainable pressure.
They're trapped by their own success.
Exactly. They're entirely dependent on their own rigid, exhausting routines just to survive the day. If they stop working for even a second, everything collapses. They are highly optimized, but they are secretly redlining at massive risk of total catastrophic burnout.
It is a stunning, precise parallel. The Volga is an ecosystem experiencing the ultimate form of corporate burnout. It is absolutely redlining.
Which forces me to ask the ultimate question. Looking at the Volga as this grand cautionary tale of engineering, how much structure is necessary before that structure begins taking away the very life it was built to support?
That is the defining unresolved tension of modern human civilization.
Right.
We build structures, we pour concrete dams, we write rigid laws, we design intricate, highly optimized global economies to protect ourselves from the chaos, violence, and unpredictability of raw nature. But if we optimize those systems purely for peak efficiency and maximum economic output, we systematically strip away the system's natural adaptability.
We make it brittle.
Exactly. We create environments that are perfectly, flawlessly suited for the exact conditions of today, but hopelessly, catastrophically fragile to the inevitable shocks of tomorrow. The Volga proves that absolute control is a myth. It is simply a deferred collapse.
Let's do a rapid synthesis of this massive deep dive.
Let's do it.
We started by mapping a geography that defied intuition. The Volga is an endorheic, closed-loop basin, a massive geographic cul-de-sac where every drop of pollution is permanently trapped.
Yes.
We saw how engineering transformed it from a wild, flooding, self-fertilizing ecosystem into a rigid mechanical staircase of concrete pacemakers.
And we traced its evolution through time. It shifted from a resilient, high-entropy natural habitat to a medieval trade network where value meant connection, to a brutal Soviet engineering project defined by total domination, arriving finally at the strained, rusting, highly leveraged machine it is today.
We broke down the mechanics of the vertically integrated factory. Water is the raw input, infrastructure is the processor, and the dying environment pays the hidden costs.
Right.
We uncovered the terrifying reality of compound risk, where a simple drought layered with daily pollution non-linearly stacks to create toxic shock and systemic collapse.
We contrasted the lived sensory experience of the fisherman smelling the decaying mud against the modern urbanite whose entire relationship to the river is abstracted by a light switch.
Yeah.
And we saw the Volga stands alone globally, less wild than the Amazon, infinitely more controlled than the Mississippi, and uniquely weaponized by a single sovereign state.
Ultimately, the Volga is no longer just a body of water. It is a massive, continent-spanning feedback loop between the forces of nature, the ambition of people, and the physical architecture of power.
Beautifully said.
It serves as the ultimate physical proof of exactly what happens when a society consciously chooses absolute mechanical efficiency over natural, chaotic flow.
As we conclude this systems analysis, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to consider, building on that hyper-controlled future scenario we discussed.
Let's hear it.
We're moving rapidly into an era of hyper-advanced artificial intelligence. Imagine a future where the physical reality of the Volga's flow, the precise opening and closing of its lock systems, its minute-by-minute hydroelectric output, and even the calculated distribution of water to specific ecological zones are entirely managed by an overarching autonomous algorithm.
That's entirely possible.
If an AI achieves absolute perfect real-time optimization of this massive water system, responding instantly to weather sensors, shifting global grain markets and energy demands without human intervention, does the river finally entirely cease to be a piece of natural geography?
Wow.
Does it shed its biological identity completely and become the world's first massive, continent-spanning liquid computer?
A liquid computer calculating the flow of a nation. That is a wild, chilling thought to leave off on. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly expansive deep dive. The next time you turn on a tap, flip a switch, or look out over a calm, predictable body of water, we hope you take a moment to look a little closer at the massive, invisible rusting machinery running just beneath the surface. Stay curious, keep unpacking the complex systems around you, and we'll catch you on the next one.